Okay, comrades, good morning. Good to see you here. I'd just like to acknowledge Gadigal land, unceded Gadigal land that we're meeting on, and pay respects to the continuing resistance and the fight for Aboriginal rights. I have some notes for a talk on the United Front that I was drawing on that I gave almost 10 years ago now, and I just realised that David put it up as a podcast on the Solidarity podcast about 2 weeks ago. So if you're an avid listener of the Solidarity podcast, there might be a little bit of repetition in what I say and what's just recently been on our podcast. But anyway, it's timeless. The theoretical discussion of the United Front, it's what we call a strategy. It's a general strategy that revolutionaries adopt in our practice of how we can actually build towards a socialist revolution. But obviously the circumstances in which we apply this strategy are very different, very different all around the world. But there's some fundamentals that I think are really, really important to go over. The first thing I'll just say is that I think the strategy of the United Front is one way that one major strategy socialists try to overcome what is an apparent contradiction in two statements that Karl Marx has made about the nature of revolution, the nature of the socialist revolution that we're calling for as socialists. On the face of these two, quite insightful statements from Marx, they appear contradictory. On the one hand, Marx says that the ruling ideas are the ideas of the ruling class. So most of the ideology that most people out there in society have most of the time is actually reflective of an ideology that comes out of capitalism. That's the worldview of the capitalist class. It's an ideology that justifies all of the inequalities, all of the exploitative nature of the system that we actually live under, and naturalises that system and makes people think that system, is somehow inevitable, is somehow natural. So there's the idea that the ruling ideas are the ideas of the ruling class. There's the second idea that's in Marxism, and that's the self-emancipation of the working class is the act of the working class. No one else is going to deliver socialism other than workers themselves. It's actually by taking power, through self-led self-emancipation is the revolution that we're calling for. So how do you overcome that contradiction? If most people, most of the time, have got the ideas of the ruling class, how is the working class supposed to emancipate itself? And that's where we get into the strategic discussion of the United Front. And I'll just explore those two aspects. So the first idea is this idea that the dominant ideas of the ruling class. I mean, there's two examples I wanted to give that I think are really, really clear and illustrative of this. The first one is overwhelmingly people accept nationalism, accept the framework of nationalism, understand themselves as being an Australian, understand the political aspirations that we have are about making a better country, that there's something that we have in common as Australians, where we've got, sort of a common destiny, we should work together to make, a better Australia. So the framework through which they see the world is through the framework of the nation and seeing themselves as a citizen of the nation. Now, this is antithetical to our view, where we see workers around the world are the subject of history. Workers around the world have a common interest no matter what our nationality is. Nationalism is actually an ideology that is a ruling class ideology that's used to divide us and weld us to the particular ruling class that exists within each nation. Why does the ruling class need nationalism? It needs nationalism because it needs a nation state. Overwhelmingly, that's what nationalism does, is it actually justifies the existence of a nation state which is needed to facilitate the process of capital accumulation within the boundaries of the nation state and is needed to actually fight for the interests of the Australian ruling class and the Australian fraction of capital on the global scale. That's why they need a nation state. But the ideology of nationalism makes us all loyal to that state, makes us all feel we have some kind of stake in that state, even though it's a tool of capitalism and a tool of the ruling class. And you think about everything from the moment you're born that teaches you the nationalist framework. I've just come back from the Northern Territory. They've just made it mandatory in the Northern Territory that they sing the national anthem every day at schools. This is something, this is something that they're saying, but it is. It's a disgraceful joke, but we had to sing the national anthem at school every day. There's a nice little ceremony where you put the flag up, and I think I might have been a prefect at some stage, and it was my responsibility to carry the flag and make sure it doesn't hit the ground, and we watch the Olympics, we watch sport, we watch everything, the mass media, the education system, everything inculcates this idea that we are part of a nation, and that's where our loyalty should be. I think the other example is the idea that we're in a dog-eat-dog world, and the best way to get ahead is to just fight for yourself and your family and your own interests. And everyone's competitive, everyone's trying to get on top of each other, and you need to join that competition, join that rat race, and put your head down, and see what you can get over and above other people. Most people understand that the reason they don't have a job is because someone else has got a job. The reason they don't have a house is because someone else has got a house. This competitive sort of individualist framework, which is antithetical, actually to, human society, for most of human society's history, where people actually lived cooperatively, thought communally, etc. But this is, again, the ideology of capitalism, and it reflects something real about the system that we live in. It is a dog-eat-dog world under capitalism. It's a system where competition's actually built in. The capitalists are competing against each other. Unless they can make, more sales and more profits than the other firm, they'll go under. So they ruthlessly compete. So that's another ideology that we all accept. And I think you can see that these ideas can be challenged as well. So even though they're ideas that are held, as general common sense, out there in society, there are ideas that often rub up against the experiences that people have, when they're out there, particularly when they start to actually struggle and fight to make a better world. So you could be given all the nationalist propaganda you like, but when you come into contact with people from different nationalities, you can very easily start to see, actually, this my friend from this place or that place, I've got more in common with this person than, some, sort of rich capitalist within my own country. That's far more profound when you're actually on strike, and you realise that unless you have unity with the different nationalities that might actually be in your workplace, you're going to be at a disadvantage and you're going to be weaker against the boss when you're struggling. So the process of actually starting to fight for your rights, starting to struggle for your rights, brings you into contact with other people in a way that challenges the dominant ideology. And most people have what we call contradictory consciousness. They have, on the one hand, those ruling class ideas that are pumped out, are the common sense, the way for viewing the world, but they also have a whole range of experiences from their own life, particularly if they've been involved in some form of social struggle, which contradict those dominant ideas. And so there's contradictory ideas that are out there, and I think that's the basis for the political orientation that most people who want to improve the world in some way have, which is the idea of reformism, the idea that we can actually somehow reform the system. Within the confines of capitalism, we can fight for reforms in the system which are going to ameliorate the worst aspects of that system. And I think, for us, very importantly, within the working class movement, there develops particular kinds of organisation and a particular layer of people, namely trade union organisation and trade union officials, that very much embody that contradictory consciousness that I was talking about. You think about a trade union official, right? Like, on the one hand, they actually need workers to struggle for them to have any negotiating power or for the boss to take them seriously at all. Unless they can show they've actually got members in a workplace, those members might take action like strike action. Why would the boss even give them the time of day? Why would the boss even talk to them? So the trade union official needs to encourage, in some ways, working class self-activity and working class struggle. On the other hand, what's the actual role of a trade union? The role of a trade union is to broker the sale of labour power, which is an inherently exploitative process. Trade unions don't exist to overthrow capitalism. Trade unions exist to actually come to agreements with bosses about the price at which labour will be sold, the rate at which labour will be exploited. And the trade unions have an entire apparatus that they want to protect. There's offices, there's money in the bank, there's cars that they drive, etc. So the organisation itself is something that trade union officials come to support. So on the one hand, they actually need to encourage workers' self-activity. On the other hand, they don't want that self-activity to get out of control and actually start challenging some of the fundamentals that give rise to the existence of a trade union bureaucracy in the first place. So there's a contradictory aspect to a trade union official and to a trade union bureaucracy that very much embeds that contradictory consciousness that I was talking about before, or embodies it, gives it a material form. And it's that the trade union bureaucracy that's very much the basis for the main reformist political formation in Australia, which is the Australian Labor Party, right? It's actually formed by trade union officials and very much embodies this contradictory process that I talked about before. The Labor Party started to be formed in the late 1890s after a major shearers' strike. There was actually an insurrectionary strike. Shearers armed themselves to actually try and stop scabs coming onto and taking their jobs. There was armed conflict with the forces of the state. So it was out of the shearers' strike that the Labor Party formed, so out of a workers' struggle that the Labor Party formed, but importantly it was also out of a defeat of that struggle. It was when the shearers got smashed and sent back to work, and the union leaders thought, how are we going to try and set up a situation where we might have some influence over the state so as it's not sending troopers out to smash our strikes. And they formed the Labor Party thinking we can actually go into power and somehow take the reins of the capitalist state, which, we've got an entire theory about why you can't do that, which I won't have time to go into today. But that's the, sort of the basis of the main reformist organisation we've got in Australia, which is the Australian Labor Party. So there's two major strategies that come out of this situation that I'm discussing. The first is the need for a revolutionary party. And this lesson came out of the experience of the First World War, when the global socialist movement, when there were organisations much like the Labor Party, there's some differences, but sort of across Europe, mass workers' organisations, many of them formally committed to Marxism, that Marxists were a part of, that represented the entire working class. They say, we represent the whole of the working class, and we stand for Parliament to try and take power so we can govern on behalf of the working class. When World War I came along, despite all those organisations having conferences in the lead up to World War I saying we've got to stand together against war, all of those major social democratic parties across Europe fell in behind their own ruling classes and went to war and supported the First World War. And it was out of that experience that Lenin and the Bolsheviks developed a very critical understanding of reformist parties and the need actually to form a revolutionary party that doesn't purport to represent the whole class. It represents what we call the most advanced sections of the working class, the sections that recognise the need to actually overthrow the system of capitalism. It organises the militants who can actually see the need for a thoroughgoing process of social revolution. But that's in a situation that's not revolutionary, that's always going to be a small minority of the working class. But hopefully with hundreds of thousands, there have been, revolutionary parties that are, mass parties, but still a minority sort of the working class. But you need that level of strong organisation if you're going to actually combat the dominant ideas that are talking about before. You need a level of discipline, organisation and clarity to actually hold firm and advocate for revolutionary principles in the face of all of the social weight and all of the pressure that pushes you towards compromise and pushes you towards reformism. But Trotsky, I'll just read this quote because I'm going to be moving towards closing soon. But Trotsky in 1922, within the Communist International, where they'd won the argument with a lot of the best militants across Europe about the need for a revolutionary workers' party, militants across the world actually joining the Communist International in the early 1920s, in this context also introduced the concept of the United Front as to why this was the second important strategic initiative other than the Revolutionary Party. He says if the Communist Party had not broken drastically and irrevocably with the reformist Social Democrats, it would not have become a party of the proletarian revolution. It would have forever remained a parliamentary safety valve attached to the bourgeois state. Who does not understand this does not know the first letter of the ABC of communism. If the Communist Party did not seek for organisational avenues to the end that at every given moment joint coordinated action between the communist and non-communist, including social democratic working masses were made possible, it would have thereby laid bare its own incapacity to win over over on the basis of mass action the majority of the working class. It would degenerate into a communist propaganda society, but never to develop into a party for the conquest of power. It's not enough to possess the sword, one must give it an edge. It's not enough to give the sword an edge, one must know how to wield it. After separating the communists from the reformists, it's not enough to fuse the communists together by means of organisational discipline. It's necessary that this organisation should learn how to guide all the collective activities of the proletariat in all spheres of its living struggle. So we've separated into a revolutionary party. But for the overwhelmingly, the masses still accept reformist consciousness. Overwhelmingly, the masses of workers are still going to vote for reformist parties. How do we actually provide leadership to that broader class? In that context, you need to actually build united fronts for struggle. You need to find ways to put forward demands that are going to connect with reformist workers as well, and build alliances and alliances with reformist workers around a program that can actually bring you into struggle against the capitalist state. So it's not about putting up demands that accept any of the ruling ideas that we've talked about before. So say I'll give you a little example from some of the anti-war campaigning that we do. We're trying our best to build opposition to the AUKUS alliance, for example, the alliance with the United States. And we're trying to build unity around, a broader possible unity around struggle against AUKUS. We don't accept, however, the idea that what Australia needs is an alternative military strategy. The Greens are talking about, well, we'll have, missiles made in Australia that'll just be defensive missiles, or submarines. So we're not into raising demands that somehow reinforce Australian militarism and Australian nationalism, give us alternative submarines, right? But we know we can build unity with reformists around end AUKUS. End the US alliance, end the support for the war on Gaza. There's demands that actually connect with the mass of people that take them into struggle against the government, that actually can raise in the process of that struggle some profound questions about the nature of the system. And very importantly, they actually bring about struggle itself. And it's in the process of struggle that people learn. It's in the process of struggle that people can be most open to arguments for socialist politics, can be most impressed by the initiative of revolutionary activists who are most consistent in terms of waging an argument about the need for struggle and about the need for workers to rely on our own power. So I don't have that much more time. Hopefully some of that more theoretical discussion can inform our discussion. I think that one of the important things that we need to understand is reformism and the idea that we can elect a party who will go to Parliament and somehow do the business for workers. This is not just like a reactionary idea of people who want to sell out. This is mass consciousness. This comes out of the experience of capitalism. You can't just denounce away the illusions that people might have in the Labor Party or the Greens. And I think that's where we very often come up against other forces on the left who might want to be more ultra-left in terms of we can't have any Labor Party people on the platform. The union leaders are all sellouts. They're not doing anything. They haven't lifted a finger for Gaza. Why would we, care about what they're saying? Yes, they haven't lifted a finger for Gaza. Yes, the Labor Party government is a bunch of sellouts. But if we can actually get trade union endorsement for the demonstration we've got calling for an end to Australia's support for Gaza, if we can actually get some Labor Party politicians to come and stand alongside us at the demonstration, that's going to create a situation where masses of people who still hold reformist ideas will see that political initiative as something that it's got mainstream support. They're confident to come along. We can come along and join and can come along and enter into the debate and the discussion about how do we actually build the power that's needed to break through and win. So it is about being patient with the reality of reformism. And just the last point I'll make is there's a lot of experience about, it's not just like, you get rid of the Labor Party and suddenly everyone's going to be revolutionary. There's plenty of experiences, particularly in Europe, if you want to look at Europe over the last 10 years, where the mainstream Social Democratic Party has collapsed. For example, in Greece, you get the rise of a new formation such as Syriza, which was very, fashionable on the left to be so excited about Syriza, which is a lot of revolutionary socialists involved in it. But what did Syriza do when they went into power? pretty much the same thing as every other social democratic government's done, and that's try to manage capitalism, but people still had those illusions actually in the system. So it's not something you can denounce away. It's a process of actually trying to win slowly through people's experience and through struggle the lessons about the need for revolutionary organisation, the need to ultimately smash the system that creates all the injustices that people want to stand up against. So I'll just leave it there for this morning. Thanks.